In 1989, the Thompson family vanished without a trace from their remote farm on the windswept plains of Alberta. For over 2 decades, no one could explain how a couple and their 2 young children could disappear so completely. The police eventually closed the case after months of fruitless searches. But 22 years later, a shocking discovery beneath the old farmhouse would reopen the mystery, and no one was prepared for the truth that had been buried there all along. The February wind cut across the frozen fields as Margaret Hill, the family's housekeeper for more than 15 years, arrived for work that Monday morning. She immediately noticed something strange. The front gate was wide open, swinging in the cold wind. John Thompson, the meticulous owner of the farm, was known for locking it every night without fail. The usual barking of the 2 farm dogs was absent. The yard felt unnervingly still. "John, Claire," she called as she stepped into the main house. Silence answered her. In the kitchen, breakfast sat untouched on the table. 2 mugs of coffee half full, bread slices left out beside a jar of jam. Claire's handbag rested on the couch, and John's truck keys hung in their usual spot by the door. It was as if the Thompsons had simply stood up in the middle of their morning and vanished. Out back, toys belonging to Daniel, age 11, and Sarah, age 8, were scattered in the snow as if abandoned mid-play. John's blue Ford pickup sat in the garage untouched. It was as if the entire family had evaporated into thin air. Panic gripped Margaret as she hurried across the yard to the small cabin where Ben Carter, the farm's foreman, lived. She banged on the door until he appeared, still pulling on his jacket. "They're gone, Ben. All of them," she blurted out, her voice trembling. Ben wasted no time. Within minutes, he had gathered the other farmhands and split them into groups to search the property's sprawling 500 acres. They combed the barns, the storage sheds, and the snow-covered fields, calling out the family's names. The icy wind carried their voices, but no answer ever came. By late afternoon, with no sign of the Thompsons, Ben phoned the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Red Deer. Just after sunset, a convoy of patrol cars pulled up to the farmhouse, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness. Sergeant Mark Reynolds stepped out, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "We'll search every inch of this place," he assured Ben as officers fanned out with flashlights. Inside, investigators found no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no overturned furniture. Everything looked perfectly normal, except for the absence of the family. The only oddity was in the mudroom. 4 pairs of boots lined up neatly by the wall, the kind the family would have worn in the snow. By 10 p.m., the RCMP had expanded the search to the surrounding forest. Dogs were brought in, but the snow had fallen heavily during the night before, erasing any tracks. It was as if the Thompsons had stepped outside and simply dissolved into the cold Alberta air. By the second day, the Thompson disappearance had become headline news across Alberta. Reporters from Calgary, Edmonton, and even Vancouver arrived at the remote farm, their vans and satellite dishes crowding the icy gravel road. Local TV anchors stood in front of the frost-covered fence, broadcasting live updates that only deepened the sense of mystery. Some speculated the family had fled due to financial trouble. Others whispered about a land dispute with a neighboring farmer. But the RCMP, careful with their words, released only a brief statement. "We are pursuing all leads." Sergeant Reynolds ordered another full sweep of the property, this time focusing on outbuildings and the frozen creek that cut through the back acres. Officers drilled holes in the ice and lowered cameras into the dark water, but found nothing but silt and debris. Margaret, still in shock, stayed with relatives in the nearby town of Drumheller. "They wouldn't just leave," she told a CBC reporter, her voice breaking. "They were good people. They loved this farm. They loved their children." One unsettling detail began to circulate among the townsfolk. The night before the disappearance, several neighbors claimed they saw strange lights moving in the tree line behind the Thompson property. Some dismissed it as hunters or snowmobilers. Others weren't so sure. Despite round-the-clock coverage, no ransom note appeared, no bank accounts were touched, and no one came forward with credible sightings. By the end of the first week, it seemed the Thompson family had simply been erased from the face of the earth. On the 10th day of the search, just as the RCMP were preparing to scale back operations, a constable named Harris noticed something odd near the south side of the farmhouse. Beneath a collapsed section of wooden fencing, The snow was thinner, almost as if the ground had been disturbed recently. He called for a shovel, and within minutes, officers were clearing away the frozen topsoil. About a foot down, they uncovered an old wooden trapdoor, weathered but still intact. The hinges groaned as they forced it open, revealing a narrow shaft lined with rotting boards. The air that rose from the opening was cold and stale, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. A flashlight beam revealed a ladder descending into darkness. Sergeant Reynolds made the call to pause and bring in a forensic team. When they finally descended, the ladder led to a cramped, dirt-walled chamber barely large enough for two people to stand. At first glance, it appeared empty, but along one wall, partially buried in the dirt, they found a child's shoe, small, pink, and dusted with decades-old soil. The discovery sent a ripple through the investigation. The Thompsons had lived in that house for only 6 years before their disappearance. So who had built the hidden space? And why? Word of the trapdoor quickly reached the media, sparking a new wave of speculation. Some called it a storm shelter. Others whispered darker possibilities. And for the first time, Sergeant Reynolds admitted to reporters, "We may be looking at something much bigger than a missing persons case." Part 5. Despite the chilling find of the hidden chamber, no further evidence was uncovered. The shoe was sent for analysis, but with no DNA technology as advanced as today's, results were inconclusive. The chamber yielded no fingerprints, no signs of struggle, nothing that could directly tie it to the Thompson family. By the spring of 1989, the RCMP officially scaled back the search. The farmhouse stood abandoned, its windows boarded, the snowmelt revealing overgrown weeds and rusting farm equipment. Over the years, the property changed hands twice, but no one stayed for long. Rumors spread in nearby towns that the land was cursed. Time passed. The story of the Thompsons faded from headlines, surviving only in the memories of locals and the occasional unsolved mystery segment on late-night TV. Margaret Hill grew older, still insisting to anyone who would listen that the family had not left by choice. Then, in 2011, 22 years after that February morning, a new owner purchased the property with plans to renovate the farmhouse. While repairing the dock that jutted out over the frozen lake behind the house, two construction workers noticed an area of the shoreline that felt hollow beneath their boots. Curiosity got the better of them. They began digging. Less than an hour later, their shovels hit something solid, an entrance hidden beneath tangled roots and decades of silt. It was another tunnel, longer, deeper, and far more elaborate than the one found in 1989. And whatever lay inside had been sealed away for decades. The workers immediately called the local RCMP detachment, and by nightfall the property was swarming with investigators once again. For Sergeant Mark Reynolds, now retired but still living in Alberta, the phone call felt like a ghost from the past. He insisted on being present. Floodlights were set up along the icy shoreline, casting stark shadows on the snow. A team of forensic experts carefully widened the opening, revealing wooden beams that had held surprisingly well over the years. The tunnel sloped gently downward, its walls reinforced with old timber and lined with rusted nails. The air inside was damp and cold, carrying an almost metallic scent. Each step echoed unnervingly. At about 15 meters in, the passage opened into a larger chamber. The space was eerily quiet, too quiet save for the distant drip of melting ice. On the ground, half buried in mud, lay remnants of everyday life. A rusted lantern, an enamel mug, a child's toy car. Nearby, a woolen scarf, still faintly patterned with pink and white stripes, lay coiled like a sleeping snake. But it was what they found against the far wall that made everyone fall silent. A wooden crate, sealed shut with heavy nails, sat alone in the shadows. Its surface was covered with deep scratches as if someone, or something, had tried desperately to get out. The team exchanged tense glances. No one spoke. The sound of a crow calling in the distance seemed to break the spell. And then, slowly, the crate began to creak. No one moved at first. The creak could have been the wood settling after decades underground, or something far worse. Sergeant Reynolds, standing just behind the forensic team, took a deep breath. "Open it," he said, his voice low but firm. Two officers stepped forward with crowbars. The sound of metal biting into old wood echoed through the chamber. Each pull of the nails released a faint, musty odor, the kind that comes from years of confinement. The final board gave way with a sharp crack. Inside, the dim beam of a flashlight revealed a jumbled collection of objects. At first glance, it seemed ordinary. Blankets, an old thermos, a small leather-bound book. But beneath them, wrapped in yellowed fabric, were bones. Small bones. The room went completely still. One of the forensic technicians knelt, carefully brushing away the dirt. "Human," she whispered. "At least 2 individuals. Possibly children." Reynolds felt his stomach knot. The scarf found earlier, the toy car, it all connected now. He looked at the crate again, noticing faint carvings along one of the interior boards. Words, scratched in shaky handwriting, barely legible after years in the dark. It read, "We're still here." The cold air seemed to thicken, and for a moment no one spoke. Whatever had happened in this tunnel, it was not just a crime. It was a message from the past, frozen in time. The leather-bound book was carefully lifted from the crate and placed on a clean evidence sheet. Its cover was cracked, the stitching frayed, but when an officer opened it, the ink inside was still surprisingly legible. The first page bore a date, February 10th, 1989, the day after the Thompsons were last seen. The entries were brief at first, describing the family being taken below and hearing noises above them, footsteps, dragging sounds. Then, as days passed, the handwriting grew more frantic. One page read, "They said we had to stay quiet. If we scream, they'll come back." The final entry, dated nearly 3 weeks later, simply read, "The light is gone. We're so cold. Please, whoever finds this, tell our story." As the pages were turned, Reynolds could feel the weight of the room pressing down on him. The discovery didn't just close a missing persons file, it confirmed years of rumors, fears, and whispered theories. Back outside, the news vans were already lining the icy road, their lights cutting through the falling snow. But the RCMP held a tight perimeter. The public wouldn't hear the full truth for weeks. When they did, the story sent shockwaves across Canada. The Thompson farm was never sold again. By spring, the land was fenced off entirely, left to the wind, the snow, and the silent dock that still jutted into the lake. And though the case was officially marked as solved, locals in Drumheller say that on cold winter nights, you can still hear faint scratching beneath the earth, like someone trying to get out.